India is home to 1.4 billion people who speak over 700 languages, practice every major religion on earth, follow thousands of caste distinctions, eat completely different food depending on which state they're in, and have almost nothing in common with each other, except that they're all Indian. India is home to 1.4 billion people who speak over 700 languages, practice every major religion on earth, follow thousands of caste distinctions, eat completely different food depending on which state they're in, and have almost nothing in common with each other, except that they're all Indian. By every logic of nation building, this country should not exist. It should have fractured into dozens of smaller states decades ago. And yet here it is, the world's largest democracy, the fifth largest economy, and one of the oldest continuous civilizations on the planet. How does it hold together? That's the question this video is going to answer. Part 1. The first civilization. Older than you think most people when they think about ancient civilizations. Think about Egypt and Mesopotamia. They should also be thinking about India. Around 3,300 BCE, roughly the same time the first Egyptian pharaohs are unifying the Nile Valley, a sophisticated urban civilization emerges in the Indus River Valley, in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. We call it the Indus Valley Civilization, or the Harappan Civilization, after its largest excavated city. What archaeologists found when they dug up Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the 1920s shocked them. These were not primitive settlements. Mohenjo-Daro, at its peak, had a population of around 40,000 people, enormous, for 2500 BCE. It had a grid street plan. It had a citywide drainage and sewage system more sophisticated than anything in contemporary Europe or the Middle East. It had standardized weights and measures suggesting a functioning trade economy. It had multi-story buildings with bathrooms connected to the drainage system. The Indus Valley Civilization stretched across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, around 1.5 million square kilometers, covering parts of modern Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan. It had over 1,000 settlements. And then, around 1900 BCE, it collapses. Cities are abandoned. The population disperses. Why? Climate change is the leading current theory. A prolonged drought that dried up the rivers the civilization depended on. But the honest answer is, we don't fully know, because we still cannot read the Indus script. Despite thousands of inscribed seals found at Harappan sites, the writing system has never been deciphered. This is a remarkable fact. One of the largest civilizations of the ancient world left behind thousands of written documents, and we cannot read a single one. Into this space, around 1500 BCE, come the Indo-Aryan peoples, migrants from the Eurasian steppe, speaking an early form of Sanskrit. They bring with them a religious and literary tradition that will shape India for the next 3,500 years. The Rig Veda, composed around 1500 to 1200 BCE, is the oldest text in any Indo-European language. It is a collection of 1,028 hymns to various gods, composed in extraordinarily sophisticated poetry. It is still recited in Hindu religious ceremonies today. The oral tradition preserving it has been transmitted with remarkable accuracy across 3.5 millennia. Think about that. A text older than Homer, older than the Hebrew Bible, still actively used in religious practice. That kind of continuity, the thread connecting a 2024 Hindu wedding ceremony to a text composed before the Trojan War is one of the most extraordinary facts about Indian civilization. The Vedic period produces not just religious texts, but an entire cosmological worldview, concepts that will eventually spread across Asia and, in the 20th century, across the world. Karma, the moral weight of actions. Dharma, duty, cosmic order, right conduct. Samsara, the cycle of rebirth. Moksha, liberation from that cycle. Yoga, the discipline of uniting individual consciousness with cosmic reality. These are not merely religious concepts. They are a complete framework for understanding existence, one that billions of people still use today. But alongside this philosophical richness, the Vedic period also produces something that will define and divide Indian society for millennia. Part 2. Caste. The system that built and broke India. The caste system is the most misunderstood major social institution in the world. In its original Vedic conception, it is a division of society into 4 varnas, categories: Brahmins, priests and scholars; Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers; Vaishyas, merchants and farmers; and Shudras, laborers and servants. The Rig Veda presents this as a cosmic order, different functions, all necessary, all part of a unified whole. In practice, over millennia, this theoretical framework calcified into something far more rigid and far more complex. The 4 varnas subdivided into thousands of jatis, hereditary occupational groups, each with its own rules about marriage, diet, occupation, and social interaction. You were born into your jati. You married within your jati. You practiced the occupation of your jati. You ate with people of your jati. And below the 4 varnas were people considered outside the system entirely. The untouchables, now called Dalits, who performed the tasks considered ritually polluting: handling the dead, cleaning sewage, working with leather. And below the 4 varnas were people considered outside the system entirely: the untouchables, now called Dalits, who performed the tasks considered ritually polluting: handling the dead, cleaning sewage, working with leather. They were subject to severe social restrictions that varied by region, but could include prohibitions on entering temples, using the same wells as upper caste Hindus, or even walking on certain streets. Caste is not a simple hierarchy like an aristocracy. It is an extraordinarily complex web of hundreds of status distinctions that varies significantly by region, period, and community. A caste that is high status in one region may be middle status in another. Castes that were historically low status have in some cases organized politically and improved their position. The system has never been static. But the core feature, birth determines social position, and that position shapes almost everything about your life, has proved remarkably durable. Despite being legally abolished in independent India's constitution, caste remains a powerful social reality in the 21st century, influencing marriage, employment, politics, and social interaction across the country. Why has it persisted? Several reasons. It provides social identity and community. Your jati is your network, your safety net, your marriage pool. It has been reinforced by religious sanction for millennia, and in democratic India, it has become a political organizing tool. Caste groups vote as blocks, politicians appeal to caste identity, affirmative action policies are organized around caste categories. The diversity paradox of India begins here. Caste creates thousands of distinct social communities within the country. each with its own internal culture, each with complex relationships, historical, economic, political, with others. The diversity paradox of India begins here. Caste creates thousands of distinct social communities within the country, each with its own internal culture, each with complex relationships, historical, economic, political, with others. Unity across this complexity is not natural. It requires constant work. The first great attempt to build something across this complexity comes in the 4th century, BCE, and it produces one of the most remarkable rulers in world history. Part 3. Ashoka. The emperor who chose compassion before Ashoka. A brief word about the political landscape he inherits. The period from roughly 600 to 300 BCE is one of the most intellectually fertile in human history, across multiple civilizations simultaneously. In Greece, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are transforming philosophy. In China, Confucius and Laozi are laying the foundations of Chinese thought. In the Middle East, the Hebrew prophets are developing monotheism. And in northern India, 2 new religious movements are challenging the Vedic orthodoxy. Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, around 500 BCE, teaches that suffering arises from desire, that desire can be overcome through the Eightfold Path, and that the goal of human life is nirvana, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, around 500 BCE, teaches that suffering arises from desire, that desire can be overcome through the Eightfold Path, and that the goal of human life is nirvana, liberation from the cycle of rebirth. It explicitly rejects the caste hierarchy. In the Buddha's community, any person regardless of birth could achieve enlightenment. Jainism, founded by Mahavira around the same time, teaches extreme nonviolence, ahimsa, and asceticism as the path to liberation. A Jain monk sweeps the ground before each step to avoid harming insects. Both movements emerge from the same Indus-Gangetic plain, in the same intellectual environment, within decades of each other, along with Confucianism and Greek philosophy. Historians call this the Axial Age, a period when human civilizations across the world seem to simultaneously reach toward abstract, universal ethical frameworks, moving beyond purely local and tribal concerns. India is at the center of this global moment. Into this environment comes the Maurya Empire, founded by Chandragupta Maurya around 322 BCE, with the strategic advice of his brilliant minister Chanakya, whose political treatise, the Arthashastra, is one of the most sophisticated works of political theory in the ancient world. The Maurya Empire is the first state to unify most of the Indian subcontinent under one rule. Founded by Chandragupta Maurya around 322 BCE, with the strategic advice of his brilliant minister Chanakya, whose political treatise, the Arthashastra, is one of the most sophisticated works of political theory in the ancient world. The Maurya Empire is the first state to unify most of the Indian subcontinent under one rule. Chandragupta's grandson Ashoka inherits this empire around 268 BCE. He extends it further through military conquest, and then something happens that changes him completely. The Kalinga War, 261 BCE. Ashoka conquers the kingdom of Kalinga in eastern India, modern Odisha. The campaign is successful by military standards. An estimated 100,000 people lose their lives in the fighting. Another 150,000 are displaced. Ashoka walks the battlefield afterward, and according to his own account, inscribed on rocks and pillars across his empire, the earliest substantial surviving royal inscriptions in India, he is overcome with remorse. When an independent country is conquered, his inscription reads, "The slaughter, death, and deportation of the people is extremely grievous to beloved of the gods, and weighs heavily on his mind." He converts to Buddhism, and then he does something unprecedented. He tries to rule an empire according to Buddhist principles. He issues edicts carved on rocks and polished sandstone pillars across the subcontinent, promoting nonviolence, religious tolerance, care for animals, welfare of subjects, and what he calls Dhamma, a practical ethics that transcends any single religion. He issues edicts carved on rocks and polished sandstone pillars across the subcontinent, promoting nonviolence, religious tolerance, care for animals, welfare of subjects, and what he calls Dhamma, a practical ethics that transcends any single religion. He builds hospitals. He plants shade trees along roads. He digs wells. He establishes what may be the world's first veterinary hospitals. His edicts explicitly promote tolerance across religious communities. One should not honor only one's own religion and condemn the religions of others, but one should honor others' religions for this or that reason. This is remarkable. His edicts explicitly promote tolerance across religious communities. One should not honor only one's own religion and condemn the religions of others, but one should honor others' religions for this or that reason. This is remarkable. In the 3rd century BCE, an emperor controlling most of the Indian subcontinent is issuing official proclamations promoting religious pluralism and the welfare of animals. Ashoka's empire doesn't last. It collapses within 50 years of his death, fragmenting into smaller kingdoms. But his legacy is enormous. The Dharma Chakra, the wheel of law from Ashoka's pillars, is on the Indian national flag today. The lion capital of Ashoka, the sculpture atop his most famous pillar, is India's national emblem, appearing on all official documents and currency. More significantly, Ashoka's attempt to hold diverse peoples together through a shared ethical framework rather than force, through values rather than violence, becomes a template that India's founders will consciously invoke 2,000 years later. More significantly, Ashoka's attempt to hold diverse peoples together through a shared ethical framework rather than force, through values rather than violence, becomes a template that India's founders will consciously invoke 2,000 years later. Part 4. 1,000 Years of Kingdoms. The diversity that precedes unity. After the Mauryas, India fractures and stays fractured for roughly 1,000 years. This is worth dwelling on, because it shapes everything. For most of its history, India was not a political unit. It was a geographical and cultural zone containing dozens, sometimes hundreds, of competing kingdoms. The idea that the entire subcontinent should be governed by a single state is actually quite new. It becomes a reality only twice before British colonialism. Under the Mauryas briefly, and under the Mughals partially. This fragmentation is not simply failure. It is also the condition under which extraordinary cultural diversity flourishes. The Gupta Empire, 320 to 550 CE, often called India's Golden Age, produces an explosion of achievement. Mathematics, the concept of zero, the decimal system, and the numeral system that the Arab world transmits to Europe, we call them Arabic numerals, but they are Indian. Astronomy. Aryabhata calculates the Earth's rotation and approximates pi with remarkable accuracy in the 5th century. Literature. Kalidasa writes poetry and drama considered among the finest in any language. Philosophy. The great commentaries on Hindu scripture are systematized. The zero. Think about that for a moment. The mathematical concept that makes modern computing possible, that makes the binary code underlying every digital device conceivable, was developed in India. Without zero, there is no calculus, no computer science, no digital revolution. India's contribution to mathematics is not a footnote. It is foundational. Meanwhile, in southern India, largely outside the orbit of the northern empires, entirely distinct civilizations develop. The Tamil kingdoms produce a literary tradition in Tamil that is completely independent of Sanskrit and rivals it in sophistication. The Sangam poetry of the early centuries CE is some of the finest lyric poetry in the ancient world. The Chola Empire, 9th to 13th centuries, builds a maritime trading network stretching to Southeast Asia and China, constructs extraordinary bronze sculptures, and erects temple complexes that are among the architectural wonders of the medieval world. The Chola Empire, 9th to 13th centuries, builds a maritime trading network stretching to Southeast Asia and China, constructs extraordinary bronze sculptures, and erects temple complexes that are among the architectural wonders of the medieval world. North and South India developed distinctly, different languages, different music, different food, different temple architecture, different social customs. They are part of the same civilization in a broad sense, sharing Hindu religious frameworks, Sanskrit as a literary language, certain shared philosophical assumptions, but they are not the same place in any practical sense. They are part of the same civilization in a broad sense, sharing Hindu religious frameworks, Sanskrit as a literary language, certain shared philosophical assumptions, but they are not the same place in any practical sense. This is still true today. A Tamil speaker from Chennai and a Hindi speaker from Delhi share a passport and a flag. They do not share a language, a cuisine, a film industry, a cricket team preference, or often a mutual intelligibility. The diversity that makes India India begins here, in this 1,000-year period of brilliant, fragmented, parallel development. Into this complex, diverse, sophisticated world comes, in the early 13th century, a new force from the northwest, and it will eventually produce the most magnificent empire India has ever seen. Part 5. The Mughals. When India became the richest place on earth, the Delhi Sultanate, established in 1206 by Turkic Muslim rulers, begins a period of Islamic political dominance in northern India that will last in various forms until the British arrive. When India became the richest place on earth, the Delhi Sultanate, established in 1206 by Turkic Muslim rulers, begins a period of Islamic political dominance in northern India that will last in various forms until the British arrive. For Hindus, this period is complex. A foreign ruling class with a different religion, sometimes tolerant, sometimes not. Then, in 1526, a Central Asian ruler named Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, defeats the last Delhi Sultan at the First Battle of Panipat and founds the Mughal Empire. The Mughals are one of the great dynasties of world history. At their peak, under Aurangzeb, in the late 17th century, they rule over 150 million people, roughly a quarter of the world's population, and control an economy producing around a quarter of global GDP. India, under the Mughals, is, by some measures, the wealthiest region on earth. But the Mughals are also the story of the diversity paradox in its most intense form. How do you rule a predominantly Hindu population as Muslim rulers? The answer varies dramatically by ruler. Akbar, 1556 to 1605, the greatest Mughal emperor, takes a radical approach. He pursues a deliberate policy of religious inclusion. He abolishes the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims. He recruits Hindus into the highest levels of his administration. His most important general, Man Singh, is a Hindu Rajput. He marries Hindu Rajput princesses and doesn't require them to convert. He creates a new syncretic spiritual movement, the Din-i-Ilahi, attempting to blend elements of Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Christianity. His court at Fatehpur Sikri is a place of genuine intellectual exchange. Muslim scholars, Hindu philosophers, Jain monks, Jesuit priests all debate in the same halls. Akbar himself, though illiterate, possibly due to dyslexia, has books read to him constantly and engages with ideas voraciously. This is the Mughal at its most extraordinary, a Muslim emperor in a Hindu-majority country, building one of the world's great civilizations through deliberate synthesis and inclusion. His great-grandson Aurangzeb takes the opposite approach. He reimposed the jizya. He destroys Hindu temples. He is a pious, austere Muslim who views Akbar's syncretism as heterodoxy. His reign is long, nearly 50 years, and militarily expansive. But his religious policies alienate the Hindu, Rajput, and Maratha kingdoms that had been the empire's key partners, generating rebellions that drain its resources. By the time Aurangzeb dies in 1707, the Mughal Empire is beginning to fracture. His successors are weaker. Regional powers, the Marathas, the Sikhs, the Hyderabad Nizam, become effectively independent. The empire survives nominally for another 150 years. But real power has gone. The Taj Mahal, built by Akbar's grandson, Shah Jahan, as a tomb for his wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died in childbirth in 1631, is the most visited building in India and one of the most recognized structures in the world. It is a Muslim emperor's monument to love, built by Hindu and Muslim craftsmen, inlaid with stones from across the empire and beyond. It is, in a sense, the Mughal synthesis in stone. While the Mughals are declining, a trading company from a small island nation is quietly establishing footholds on the Indian coast. And what begins as commerce will end as one of the most consequential colonial projects in history. Part 6. Britain. The company that stole a continent. The British East India Company is founded in 1600, a private corporation given a royal charter to trade with Asia. It establishes trading posts in Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. For its first century and a half, it is primarily a commercial enterprise. Then the Mughal Empire weakens, and the company sees an opportunity. 1757, the Battle of Plassey. Robert Clive leads company forces against the Nawab of Bengal and wins, largely through bribery. A key Bengali general is paid to stand his troops down. The company gains control of Bengal, the richest province of India. What follows over the next 100 years is one of the most audacious power grabs in history. A private corporation, accountable to shareholders in London, not to any democratic body, gradually conquers most of the Indian subcontinent, sometimes through direct military force, sometimes through the subsidiary alliance system. Indian rulers are protected by company troops they must pay for, incurring debts that eventually require ceding territory, sometimes simply by deposing rulers on pretexts. By the mid-19th century, The British East India Company effectively controls most of India, a subcontinent of hundreds of millions of people, governed by a corporation. The economic consequences are still debated, but the broad outlines are clear. India in 1700 produces an estimated 25% of global GDP. India in 1900, after 150 years of British rule, produces around 4%. The deindustrialization of India, particularly its textile industry, which had been among the most sophisticated in the world, is one of the largest transfers of wealth in history. Economist Utsa Patnaik estimates, using tax and trade data, that Britain extracted the equivalent of $45 trillion from India between 1765 and 1938. The methodology is disputed, but the direction is not. Wealth flowed from India to Britain, not the other way. 1857. The Indian Rebellion, called the Sepoy Mutiny in British accounts. The First War of Independence in Indian nationalist accounts. Indian soldiers in the company's army rebel, joined by various princes and civilian populations. The rebellion is suppressed after more than a year of brutal fighting. The aftermath is significant. The British Crown abolishes the East India Company and takes direct control of India. Queen Victoria becomes Empress of India. A full colonial administration, the British Raj, is established. The British Raj lasts until 1947, 90 years of direct crown rule. Its legacy is genuinely mixed. On the negative side, famines that kill tens of millions, partly because British economic policies prioritize export even during food shortages. The systematic undermining of Indian industry. Racial hierarchy embedded in law and social practice. The division of Indian society through census categories that hardened fluid identities, particularly around religion, into fixed political categories with lasting consequences. On the other side, the railway network. 67,000 kilometers built by 1947, still the backbone of Indian transport. The unified legal and administrative system that makes governing a single Indian state conceivable. The English language, which becomes the common tongue across India's linguistic diversity, the language of higher education, law, and inter-regional communication. And perhaps most significantly, the concept of India as a single political unit, with defined borders, a single administration, and, eventually, a nationalist movement that would demand independence for that unit. The British created India, not the civilization, which is ancient, but the specific political entity of India, with its current borders, and the movement to liberate that entity from British rule produces one of the most remarkable political figures of the 20th century. A small, bespectacled lawyer who will defeat an empire without an army. Part 7. Gandhi and the Independence Movement. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returns to India from South Africa in 1915. He is 45 years old, has spent 20 years practicing law and developing his philosophy of nonviolent resistance, satyagraha, truth force, in the struggle against racial discrimination in South Africa. What he builds in India over the next 30 years is without precedent. A mass political movement that mobilizes tens of millions of people across every caste, class, and religious community, using nonviolent civil disobedience as its primary weapon. What he builds in India over the next 30 years is without precedent. A mass political movement that mobilizes tens of millions of people across every caste, class, and religious community, using nonviolent civil disobedience as its primary weapon.
The strategic insight is profound. The British Raj depends on the cooperation of the governed, on Indians staffing the bureaucracy, the army, the police, the courts.
If that cooperation is withdrawn, if millions of people simply refuse to participate in colonial institutions, the system cannot function.
You don't need to defeat an army, you need to make governing impossible.
The Salt March of 1930 is the movement's defining moment.
Gandhi walks 240 miles to the sea, picks up a handful of salt, and violates the British salt monopoly, which required Indians to buy salt taxed by the colonial government. Thousands follow him. Across India, people make their own salt in defiance of the law. The British arrest tens of thousands.
The images of peaceful protesters being beaten while refusing to fight back travel around the world. The moral logic is devastating. A government that responds to peaceful protest with violence has lost its legitimacy. Britain can rule India only by visibly being brutal to people who won't fight back.
This is not sustainable.
But Gandhi's movement carries a tension at its core. It is trying to unite a society of extraordinary internal divisions.
Hindus and Muslims, upper castes and Dalits,
the educated urban elite and the rural peasantry,
the commercial middle class and the industrial working class, north and south,
urban and rural. Gandhi addresses these divisions with varying success. His relationship with B.R. Ambedkar, the brilliant Dalit lawyer who becomes the principal author of India's constitution, is particularly fraught.
Ambedkar argues that Gandhi romanticizes Indian village life without confronting how oppressive caste hierarchy makes that life for Dalits.
He advocates for separate electorates for Dalits, a guarantee of political representation. Gandhi opposes this, arguing it will divide the nation, and threatens to fast unto death to prevent it. Ambedkar eventually yields under enormous pressure in the Pune Pact of 1932. The disagreement between Gandhi and Ambedkar captures a fundamental tension in Indian nationalism. Can you build national unity without first addressing the internal inequalities that divide the nation? Or does demanding internal transformation first make national unity impossible?
This tension is never fully resolved. It runs through Indian history to the present day.
The independence movement also carries a religious fault line. The Indian National Congress, led first by Gandhi and then by Jawaharlal Nehru, is officially secular, representing all Indians, regardless of religion.
The Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, argues that Muslims need their own state because a Hindu-majority India will inevitably marginalize the Muslim minority.
Both positions contain truth. Both positions lead to disaster. August 1947. Independence arrives, and with it, a catastrophe.
Part 8. Partition.
The wound that doesn't close. August 14th to 15th, 1947. At midnight, British India is partitioned into two independent states, India and Pakistan. The boundary, drawn by British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe in 5 weeks, largely from maps and census data, without visiting most of the territory he was dividing, cuts through Punjab in the west and Bengal in the east.
What follows is one of the largest forced migrations in human history. An estimated 10 to 20 million people cross the new borders, Muslims moving to Pakistan, Hindus and Sikhs moving to India, often under conditions of extreme danger. Between 200,000 and 2 million people lose their lives in sectarian violence. Entire villages are destroyed. Families are separated.
Communities that had coexisted for generations turn on each other.
Gandhi is devastated. He had hoped independence would come without division. He spends the days around independence not in Delhi at the celebrations, but in Calcutta, trying to stop the violence. On January 30th, 1948, He is shot and killed by a Hindu nationalist who believes Gandhi has been too accommodating to Muslims.
The man who built the independence movement through nonviolence loses his life to violence. Nehru, India's first prime minister, inherits a traumatized, impoverished, newly independent nation of 350 million people, speaking hundreds of languages, practicing multiple religions, organized by thousands of caste distinctions, with 562 princely states that need to be integrated, and a border with a hostile new neighbor, across which millions have just fled. Nehru, India's first prime minister, inherits a traumatized, impoverished, newly independent nation of 350 million people, speaking hundreds of languages, practicing multiple religions, organized by thousands of caste distinctions, with 562 princely states that need to be integrated, and a border with a hostile new neighbor, across which millions have just fled. The question is not whether India can become great.
The question is whether India can survive.
Nehru's answer: give the diversity constitutional protection rather than trying to suppress it. India's constitution, drafted primarily by Ambedkar and adopted in 1950, is one of the longest and most detailed in the world.
It guarantees fundamental rights for all citizens regardless of religion, caste, or gender. It explicitly abolishes untouchability. It establishes affirmative action, reservations for Dalits and tribal peoples in education and government employment.
It makes India a secular state, not atheist, but neutral between religions. And it declares India a union of states, each with its own government, in their own regional language.
The federal structure acknowledges what the British Raj tried to ignore. India is not one place. It is many places sharing a political framework. This is the bet at the heart of Indian democracy, that a constitutional framework that protects diversity can hold together a country that has almost nothing else in common. For the first 70 years of Indian independence, that bet, with enormous turbulence along the way, broadly holds.
Part 9. India. From Nehru to the economic revolution, Nehru governs India for 17 years, until his death in 1964. His model, democratic socialism, a planned economy with significant state control, aligned internationally with neither the U.S. nor the Soviet Union, the non-aligned movement, socially progressive, officially secular.
The results are mixed.
India's economy grows, but slowly, constrained by bureaucratic regulation, so excessive it becomes known as the license Raj. Every business decision requires government permits.
Innovation is throttled. The private sector is viewed with suspicion, but democratic institutions hold. Elections happen. Opposition parties win sometimes. The press is relatively free. The courts function independently. For a country emerging from colonial rule, maintaining democratic institutions through poverty and crisis is a genuine achievement, one that China, next door, does not manage. Nehru's daughter Indira Gandhi becomes prime minister in 1966 and breaks the democratic pattern.
In 1975, facing a court ruling that her election was fraudulent, she declares a state of emergency, suspending elections, jailing opposition leaders, censoring the press.
For 21 months, India is a soft dictatorship.
Then she calls elections, apparently expecting to win. She loses decisively. The opposition coalition takes power. 2 years later, she wins again. The emergency is remembered in India as a cautionary tale. Even strong leaders can damage democratic institutions. But India's democratic culture proved resilient enough to survive it. Voters punished her peacefully at the ballot box. 1991 is the year that changes India's economic trajectory. Facing a balance of payments crisis, foreign exchange reserves dropping to 3 weeks of import cover, Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, dismantles the license Raj. Tariffs are cut. Foreign investment is opened.
Industries are deregulated. The results are transformative.
India's GDP growth accelerates through the 1990s and 2000s.
A technology services industry emerges, Infosys, Wipro, TCS, serving global clients from Bangalore. The middle class expands rapidly.
Hundreds of millions of people rise out of poverty.
India becomes the back office of the world. Software development, call centers, business process outsourcing, leveraging its English language education, its large technically trained workforce, and its time zone, perfectly positioned to serve both European and American clients. India becomes the back office of the world. Software development, call centers, business process outsourcing, leveraging its English language education, its large technically trained workforce, and its time zone, perfectly positioned to serve both European and American clients.
The IT boom creates a new India alongside the old one. Gleaming tech campuses in Bangalore, enormous shopping malls in Mumbai, a consuming middle class of hundreds of millions, and at the same time, farmers in debt crisis, persistent malnutrition in rural areas, and infrastructure that struggles to keep pace. The IT boom creates a new India alongside the old one. Gleaming tech campuses in Bangalore, enormous shopping malls in Mumbai, a consuming middle class of hundreds of millions, and at the same time, farmers in debt crisis, persistent malnutrition in rural areas, and infrastructure that struggles to keep pace. Two Indias, developing at different speeds, held together by the constitutional framework that Ambedkar built.
Part 10.
Modi and the question of what India is. 2014 Narendra Modi wins the Indian general election with the largest parliamentary majority in 30 years.
He wins again in 2019. A modified majority in 2024 still keeps him in power as Prime Minister.
Modi is the most consequential Indian political figure since Nehru, and the most controversial. His background is unlike any previous Prime Minister.
He comes from an other backward class community, a lower caste group, born into poverty, in Gujarat.
He joined the RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, a Hindu nationalist organization, as a teenager, and has been associated with it throughout his life.
He rose through the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, the political wing of the Hindu nationalist movement.
His economic record is significant. Digital India, a massive push to expand internet connectivity and digital payments, has genuinely transformed how hundreds of millions of Indians interact with government services. The rollout of direct benefit transfers reduces corruption in subsidy programs.
Infrastructure investment accelerates.
India's GDP growth makes it consistently one of the fastest-growing major economies in the world. In 2023, India overtakes China to become the world's most populous nation. 1.4 billion people.
Its economy, on current trajectories, is expected to become the third largest in the world within this decade. But Modi's tenure also raises the most serious questions about Indian democracy in decades. The Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 creates a path to citizenship for refugees from neighboring countries, but excludes Muslims.
Critics argue this violates India's secular constitutional principle that religion is irrelevant to citizenship. The government argues it protects religious minorities persecuted in Muslim-majority neighbors. which would not include Muslims by definition. The abrogation of Article 370, which gave Jammu and Kashmir special autonomous status, is done by executive action, without local consent, accompanied by a communications blackout and mass detentions in the region. Press freedom rankings have declined sharply.
Journalists critical of the government face legal harassment. Independent institutions, the Election Commission, the judiciary, the central bank, face accusations of political pressure. The diversity paradox is at its most intense here.
India's founding vision, Nehru's secular pluralist constitutional democracy, is challenged by a Hindu nationalist movement that argues India is fundamentally a Hindu nation and that the secular framework imposed by westernized elites is artificial. India's founding vision, Nehru's secular pluralist constitutional democracy, is challenged by a Hindu nationalist movement that argues India is fundamentally a Hindu nation and that the secular framework imposed by westernized elites is artificial. The BJP's implicit answer to the identity question is, India is Hindu civilization.
The 200 million Muslims, the Christians, the Sikhs, the Jains, the Buddhists, they are welcome as long as they accept the primacy of Hindu culture.
The opposition's argument, this fundamentally betrays the constitutional bargain that holds India together. If majority religion defines national identity, every minority community has reason to question whether the state is truly theirs. This debate, what holds India together, and whether diversity is India's strength or its problem, is the central political contest of contemporary India.
And it is not simply an Indian debate. It is the defining debate of the 21st century, playing out in country after country. Can diverse, pluralist societies hold together?
Or does cohesion require a dominant identity that others must accept?
Epilogue. The country that shouldn't exist, but does India, should not work.
Every political scientist looking at it from first principles, the linguistic diversity, the religious complexity, the caste system, the economic inequality, the colonial trauma, the hostile neighbors, would predict failure. Every political scientist looking at it from first principles, the linguistic diversity, the religious complexity, the caste system, the economic inequality, the colonial trauma, the hostile neighbors, would predict failure.
And yet,
the world's largest democracy has held elections, peacefully and on schedule, for 75 years. Power has transferred between parties repeatedly. A country of 1.4 billion people, speaking 700 languages, goes to the polls and produces a government.
that is extraordinary.
The economy that was among the world's poorest at independence is now the fifth largest and rising. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty.
India produces world-class scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers in every field. The cultural output is staggering.
Bollywood produces more films than Hollywood.
Indian classical music and dance traditions of extraordinary sophistication are alive and practiced. Indian cuisine has conquered the world. Curry is the most popular dish in Britain, not fish and chips.
Yoga is practiced by hundreds of millions globally.
Indian philosophy and spirituality have shaped the global New Age movement, mindfulness culture, and countless individual lives. What India gives the world is not just products and services. It is a proof of concept, however imperfect, that diversity can be governed democratically.
That a country of extraordinary internal differences can function as a political unit.
That you don't need cultural homogeneity to build a nation.
Whether that proof of concept holds Whether the constitutional framework survives the pressures of majoritarian politics, economic inequality, and external challenge is the open question of India's next chapter. The country that shouldn't exist has existed for 75 years.
The next 75 will be the real test.